still harass ships. He did still stop ships. And as a result, it was hurting the U.S. economy. Okay? So he said he would do it, but he actually ended up not doing it, except for the fact that he did not impress soldiers. Okay? All right, let's read the screen there. Bryson, please, as a quick review.
Napoleon's deception. France, led by Napoleon, stated that they would not harass or seize U.S. ships. He stated he would allow the U.S. to trade freely. Napoleon, the French, did continue to seize U.S. ships, but France did turn U.S. against Britain, really on Napoleon's part.
Why was that brilliant on Napoleon's part, Bryson?
Because France didn't like Britain.
Okay.
If they got U.S. to go hate Britain, they would probably wage a war against them.
Worked right into his plans, didn't it? From a world history point of view, when does Britain get their revenge, so to speak? Go ahead.
World War I?
No. No. Britain and France are on the same side then. When does Britain get its revenge? See if you can follow me. When Britain defeats... Nobody's following. At...
a battle in some place.
So far, I agree with you.
Is it a War of 1812 battle? I don't know.
At what famous battle? H2O.
Oh, Waterloo.
Waterloo, yes. So Britain will get its revenge. I see we have some 70s music fans here.
That's the only reason I knew that.
You never heard of Waterloo? Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo.
I don't know. I think
Lord Nelson defeats France at the Battle of Trafalgar, and then finally Napoleon is finally defeated at Waterloo, sent to Leipzig. Well, that was St. Helena, and then St. Helena. Does that ring a bell?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember.
Well, that's what I said on a world history point of view. Okay, here's the deal. Britain will eventually defeat France, Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. So they will get their revenge. Okay, now sing. Keep going. It's a very easy song. All they keep saying is Waterloo. I know. It's not like the song Lollipop.
Lollipop, lollipop, oh, lollipop, lollipop. It doesn't even start.
Nobody knows the song Waterloo. Well, hopefully I made a point now as to mentioning the name of the band is ABBA.
Yes.
Okay. About 50 years old the song is. You had to be there. Okay, on we go. All right, let's read through this. Quick review again, and this is where we left off yesterday. Georgia, please.
Although both France and GB.
That's Great Britain.
Okay. Although both France and Great Britain both seized U.S. ships, only Great Britain impressed soldiers. Great Britain was another concern because it stood in the way of Canada and also helped supply Native Americans.
The goals there would be just that, okay? Controlling Canada, and after all the treaties with Native Americans to make sure there were no further attacks. Okay, the War of 1812 did divide the country. There's that. What word did Washington use? Sectionalism, yes. Here we go again. Country being divided. Nowhere near like the Civil Wars coming up, but nonetheless, the country was divided in thoughts and feelings about the war. Okay, before we get to this, let's take a look at the first page of your handout packet. Gracie, do what you gotta do. Where you have the War of 1812, why did British merchants and manufacturers begin to pressure their government? Why did they begin to pressure their government? Evelyn, what do you got?
It affected like farmers in the South.
Well, but this is dealing with the British merchants, actually.
Oh, I don't know.
Who's got it? Jesse.
They wanted the government to drop trade restrictions. Wait, hold on. What?
Yeah.
You're right. You're right.
Oh yeah. Trade restrictions on
Yeah.
The United States.
the
They pressured their own, the British merchants pressured their own government, the British government, to drop trade restrictions because it was actually hurting them. Okay? It's very important that you look at the next question. This is very important. Finally, in June 1812, Britain what? Ended all on American, but it was two days later, the British learned the U.S. Congress had declared what? War. So really everything that the United States wanted Britain to do, they did, but there was still a declaration of war, and that's what I want you to understand. Madison was going through with this. Very controversial. Very controversial. Okay, so let's take a look at the next one then. Who are the most famous war hawks? Do we have that? Maggie.
Henry Clay, John C.
Calhoun.
Yeah.
Clay, Calhoun, and Grundy. Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun, and Felix Grundy. Make sure you're aware of those names, especially Clay and Calhoun, because they're going to play a big role in U.S. history coming ahead. British trade restrictions hurt who the most? Good.
Southern Flanders and Western farmers.
Which brings us to the question up on the screen then. Why did the following regions of the country want war? And make sure you have that. The trade restrictions were hurting the southern planters and western farmers. Let's do that last question while we're at it. Western farmers also blamed who for what? Very good. Yes, very good. So there were two things at stake there. Again, mostly the U.S. wanted to control Canada, and of course, the trade restrictions were hurting the U.S. farmers on top of it. Also, the British were blamed for arming Native Americans. So let's take a look up at the screen, go through this a little bit more deeply. First of all, I want you to know the name Warhawks. Warhawks was a title given to the young Republican congressman from the 1810 election. And why were they called the Warhawks? They wanted war, yes. They wanted war. The Warhawks were the ones that wanted war. They wanted the war. Warhawks want war. Okay, let's get some specific reasons, or let me just throw this out there. Henry Clay, I don't know if you put that down. Just make a quick note if you can, pencil it in there. He's from Kentucky, and John C. Calhoun is from South Carolina. Something to keep in the back of your mind, those two states were very much pro-slavery, and that's definitely going to play a key role later. Not in the War of 1812, but later on, yes, big time. Okay. And once again, to reiterate, war with Great Britain was the only way to defend U.S. honor, gain Canadian land, and destroy the threat of Native American resistance. So there was an ulterior motive there with Canada and, of course, controlling Native Americans. The threat was there on the frontier. We had crossed, of course, the Appalachian Mountains by now. Anybody remember what rule that was, where we weren't supposed to cross the Appalachian Mountains? Bryson?
The Proclamation of 1763.
And that, of course, went right out the window after the United States won of course, the Revolutionary War, purchase of Louisiana. Don't forget the Northwest Ordinance, where we had already established states in that area. So, really, that's gone out the window. So, the threat of Native American resistance was still there. Many did not agree with that. Many thought Native American land was Native American land and they should be allowed to have their land. Okay, so I want you to understand there was definitely some controversy there. I'll say it again, there was definitely some controversy. Okay, and of course we could talk about that a lot. Okay, so reasons for war. To be crystal clear, kind of have this on your handout, but let's make sure we get the specifics and make sure we're definitely understanding why the war hawks want the war. Number one, we already gone over, but let me again be crystal clear. The British trade restrictions and impressment were hurting U.S. farmers. Number two, as I'd already said, the U.S. accused the British of arming Native Americans. Number three kind of goes right along with that. Expand the country westward. And number four, the U.S. wants access to Canada. There's a major British presence in Canada. Okay, so let's read through it just one more time to hear it. Evelyn, if you would, please.
Reasons for war. South and West, British trade restrictions and impressment hurt U.S. farmers. The U.S. accused the British of arming Native Americans. They wanted to expand the country westward and push out Native Americans. And the U.S. wanted access to Canada.
Okay, so again, just to be clear, that's the reasons for the war.
For number three, how does that correlate? Like, they won the war against Great Britain. How does that correlate to pushing out the Native Americans? Like, what
Well,
effect is one having on
it was a continuation of the war because what happened is think of it as a progression moving westward. So you win the war, so we're going to ignore the Proclamation of 1763. Okay, so we're going to continue moving westward. Then we have the Northwest Ordinance where we're establishing states in the Northwest. Then with Jefferson, we have the Louisiana Purchase. So now we're going beyond the Mississippi River. Since that was considered U.S. territory, the United States government wanted to control that territory. And Native Americans were considered, in some cases, let's say it this way, a major resistance to the U.S. plan, which where we're going to go next is Manifest Destiny. And that situation is only going to get worse. We're going to have the Native American Removal Act under Andrew Jackson. And of course, once the Civil War is over, we're going to have what are referred to as the Great Native American Wars. They certainly weren't great, and millions died. Okay? So it was, to answer your question, the goal of the United States to continue pushing westward. Okay? Once again, let me be crystal clear. Number three is very controversial. And your history book will actually call it a black eye in U.S. history. And we all know those stories. And of course, we'll go through that again. Okay. The Western frontier. Where exactly was it? It was now the upper Midwest. The people in this region favored War of Britain because they felt it would lead to greater expansion and settlement for the Americas. I realize what you're thinking. Lewis and Clark had already gone to the Pacific. Yes, they did, but there was not a big U.S. population in that area yet. It's coming, though. Not too much until James K. Polk becomes president. We're going to see much more movement westward. Okay. Number five, note this as well. The U.S. also wanted to claim Florida. The United States also wanted to officially claim Florida. So that was another reason for the war. There was a major British presence in Florida at the time. Also, which goes along with controlling Canada, there was disagreement over the border with Canada. And keep in mind, Canada was controlled by Britain at the time. Has everybody ever been to Canada? What language do they speak in Canada?
French,
Yeah, and depending where you go, especially anywhere in Quebec, you're going to see a major French presence. Montreal, Quebec, um, Toronto's more English, but you would see both. Don't forget that goes back to the French fur traders in Canada. But also, since it was controlled by Britain, actually the country of Canada has 2 official languages. Little trivia for you: the United States has never deemed an official language. Okay, I'll throw that out. Okay, so why was the War of 1812 called Mr. Madison's War? And I asked you to take a look at this for tomorrow, actually. But let's talk about it. Why do you think they called it Mr. Madison's War? I kind of mentioned it yesterday a little bit. Evelyn, what do you think?
Well, like people that didn't want the war probably didn't want to have any part be associated with it, so they put it on Madison.
I agree. And you certainly have the concept down there. Okay, so I want you to know the ones that really called it Mr. Madison's War would be those in the East and the North. The Federalists didn't want the war. Why do you think the Federalists didn't want the war? Why do you think the Federalists don't want the war? Why would they not want the war? Go ahead.
I mean, they were more in like New England like area, so if the entire like trade restrictions, they probably didn't hit them as hard.
Exactly. The agriculture was more in the South and the West, so the Federalists weren't hit as hard at all by the trade restrictions. Okay. Ellie, you had your hand up as well.
They still had ties to Great Britain, didn't they?
Still had ties, still had good relations with the shipping. A lot of goods coming out of New England were allowed to come freely into Britain. Also, I think we could think something really simple: dollar signs. The Federalists in New England were doing fine. If you're doing fine, the last thing you want to do is go to war. Okay? You don't want to go to war if everything's okay. Okay? So you don't want to lose what you got, basically. Okay. So the election of 1812, this is actually over on the second page there. Did anybody get that? Kind of ran the picture there. Anybody get that? The election of 1812? Who ran against who? You have it? Okay, I'll give you this one. It was actually DeWitt Clinton. That's a name to remember. And also, he runs against Madison. Clinton versus Madison. As far as I know, no relation to President Clinton, who's coming your way in the 1990s. Why is it important to point that out? This election. DeWitt Clinton plays a bigger role later on. I won't even have him on the test. But look at when the election was. Go ahead.
During the war.
During a war. What election does that go back to? Think of an election that set the course for future presidential elections. I was hoping everybody's hand would be in the air. Jesse. The election of 1800, yes, where Jefferson was elected and both sides agreed to honor the crinkly piece of paper, yellow paper, you buy it in souvenir shops. Constitution. I want you to know that. I don't say that this was another test of the Constitution, but it certainly was based on the precedent of the election of 1800, where even during war you have elections. We've had great depressions in this country. We still had elections. Let me go one step further. As I said before, I'll say it again. Even during the Civil War, we still had elections. Now, the South wasn't allowed to vote in that election. election, but nonetheless. Okay, well, I oversimplified that. I'll explain that when we get to it. Okay, so the U.S. declares war. Madison was the first U.S. president to ask Congress for a declaration of war. Take notice the way I worded that. He asked Congress to declare war. You've had civics class. Who is allowed to declare war? Or what is allowed to declare war? What do you think, Bryson? Who can declare war?
The House of Representatives.
Well, actually, the Senate would vote also, but the House of Representatives has the major say, yes. Good. Madison asked Congress to declare war. The president cannot declare war. Okay? The president cannot declare war. Only Congress can. Now, jot this down. A little bit of trivia for you while we're at it. There have been 5 declarations of war in U.S. history. 5. Name one. Sarah? 1812. Good. Give me another one. You know another one? Elle, you want to help?
1941. Was that when World War II started?
World War II, yes. World War II. Good.
I have a question. So for World War II, we had stuff going on Pearl Harbor, Japanese, and we also had the Second World War going on, but we got involved with that. So was it a double declaration of war? Or was it just
Well, technically speaking, it actually was. In fact, there were about, if I remember right, about 8 different declarations within the declaration. As we declared war on Japan, Germany, and then the Axis powers as well. So technically, yes, but it was all part of the official declaration. Good question. But let's put that as one, since the other ones were all part of World War I. Not to get too far off subject, but Japan and Germany had an agreement. The question would be, what if after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, Germany actually declared war on the United States? What would have happened if Germany didn't declare war on the United States? Would we have ever gone to war against Germany? That's a question to think about. Okay, give me another one. So we got 1812, World War II.
Vietnam.
No. Good answer, though. No. There was never actually a declaration of war. It was called a police action. And I always say, don't ever tell a Vietnam soldier that it was not a true war. You're probably going to get a lot of pushback on that one. Go ahead.
World War I.
World War I, yes. Those are usually the 2 I get right away. World War I, World War II, and of course 1812. The other 2 are not as well publicized. You're going to learn them in this class, though. Go ahead.
I don't know if this is right. Korean War?
The Korean War, there was no declaration of war either. Good answer, though. Clearly was a war. Go ahead.
I don't know if this is the thing, but the war on terrorism,
You would think that. No. They authorized the president to use force, but there was never a declaration of war. The other 2, the Mexican-American, and the other one happened in 1898, down in Central America. Anybody want to try? The Spanish-American. The Spanish-American. Okay, moving on then. The declaration of war against Britain did not mean an alliance with France. Okay, remember that? The enemy of my enemy is my friend? No. The declaration of war did not mean all of a sudden we were friends with France. In fact, thank you. I'm going to throw this out there with this. In fact, we almost went to war against France also. The vote was very close. Okay, I don't remember the actual numbers, but it was actually very close in the House of Representatives to go to war against France also. Okay, Federalists did not support the war. George, you really are scaring me. All congressional Federalists voted no. I do want you to know that. All Federalists in Congress actually voted no. Okay, let's conclude with this. Was declaring war a big mistake? Was this a big mistake? Thank you, Evelyn. Should I put your picture up there doing that? Yeah?
Or the Home Alone kid.
Yeah, there you go. Home Alone. Boy, we are going back to the 70s and 80s today. How about that? Was declaring war a mistake? Well, many thought so. Take a look at this. The Army wasn't prepared for war. We really didn't have an overall strategy. Is our goal to defeat Native Americans, defeat Canada, or defeat Britain? Are we going to sail our ships over to Britain and fight a war? Well, it's hard to do that if you look at the last one there. We didn't really even have an army, let alone the militia would not leave the country. Now, how are you going to take Canada if your militia won't leave the country? Do you see why a lot